exciting group. So I'm about to introduce Dr. Cheryl Talley, but first I'd like to read you a bio regarding her experience. Dr. Cheryl Talley is from Virginia State University, and her research examines the factors that lead to lasting behavioral change, especially those related to high academic achievement. In published studies and projects funded by the National Science Foundation, Dr. Talley and her colleagues have sought to reveal the role that effective factors such as academic identity and emotional regulation play in student success. With her training in effective neuroscience, Dr. Talley utilizes various cognitive strategies, including mindfulness training, to help students develop strong academic identities and associated behaviors. Dr. Talley received her PhD and master's degrees in psychobiology from the University of Virginia. And I'm going to turn it over to her right now. And I think we have about 8 to 10 minutes, Dr. Talley, for you to speak. I don't know if you have slides, but you are now the presenter.
Thank you so much. It's been my pleasure to hear the presentations that preceded me. They were a great preparation for what I'd like to share. I would like to share my screen. I only have one slide, and it will be about a theory. So let me just begin by saying that I am just recently become the research director for the new STEM-US Undergraduate Success Research Center. That's STEMuscenter.org, STEMuscenter.org. And this is a $8 million NSF-funded center that is led by a team of researchers from Spelman College, Morehouse College, and Virginia State. I am in the position of directing the research in the Analytic Hub. And our primary mission is to tell the story of successful HBCU academic interventions. So unbeknownst to some, 25% of African-American STEM terminal degree holders come from HBCUs, 25%, while HBCUs educate less than 10% of all African-American undergraduates. So in this case, there is a disproportionate success rate, but that's not a story that we often hear. So in telling an authentic story, we hope to increase the scholarship in underrepresented minoritized people in STEM. And we plan to enlist the help of our external partners, faculty fellows who will come from as many as 50 HBCUs. And eventually, we hope to add other external partners, including Hispanic serving institutions, Native American, and minority serving institutions. So the STEMUS Center pursues this goal by conducting research and the study of academic interventions. And to do that, we use the tools of social science, which actually mirror the tools in the natural sciences: hypothesis testing, data collection, and the use of a theory. The aim is not to study which interventions work. We know what works. Bridge programs work. They give entering students opportunities to form bonds, experience rigorous coursework as a cohort in a non-threatening environment. We know that mentoring programs work. They encourage relationship building between small groups or dyads, include an experienced and relatable mentor, and the mentor perceives the mentor as someone who has either reached their aspirational goals or has some skill that will help them reach their goal. The stronger the bond, the more likely to motivate the student. We know that wise interventions work. We're early in the new context, like at Stanford, where this innovation was first studied. African-American students were presented a vignette of common scenarios that were stressful, and then were shown students who looked like them having a new interpretation of those incidents. So what could have been interpreted as demeaning or insulting was flipped around, and it became a stepping stone towards resilience. That effect of a 1-hour intervention in freshman year lasted for 4 years. So this metacognitive, the ability to notice one's thinking and then change one is thinking, is used to teach students a whole new way to cope. And that's what I'm actually going to talk to you about today. So all of these interventions work. We know that. What we want to know is why they work. So as I go through my presentation, I'm going to ask that you join me in this work of thinking, conceptualizing, hypothesizing, where possible solutions would fit in this theoretical framework. There will only be one slide, and so that's your only homework. All right. May I have that slide now, Cindy? All right, let me see how I can get it. Here it is.
Yep.
Here we go. Can you see the boxes?
Yes, we can.
Thank you so much. All right. So this is PVEST, the phenomenological variant of the ecological systems theory. Now, even if you're not in psychology, you probably know an ecological systems theory where there is a circle, you're in the middle, there's your family's influence, then you live in a neighborhood, the neighborhood's influence, then you live in a region of the country, then a continent, et cetera, et cetera. So Dr. Spencer recognized that the ecological systems theory had merit. However, she interjected race and class because two little dots in different circles racially in the United States will experience completely different things. And so her developmental theory, now published in over 150 published works, she's has received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Psychological Association and the National Academy of Sciences. And this theory applies to everyone. It is a developmental theory. And so as you go around the circle in counterclockwise, the goal is identity. So,
excuse me, Dr. Talley, can you make your slide a little bit bigger because we're only seeing part of it? So if you go into the slideshow, it might be a little bigger. Thank you.
Is that better?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. All right. There we go. All right. So I really appreciated the previous presenters, Dr. Effie's point to publications. My graduate student, Victoria Davis, has part of her dissertation literature review, looked at similar studies as you did, Dr. Davis, and found that only 25 published since 2000 have a social science theory grounding the work. So I can't stress the importance of having a theory to ground work like this because it provides the basis for replication and scaling. Otherwise, we will continue to have popcorn interventions where one thing works here, one thing works there, and then when the grant goes away or the person goes away, there is nothing to last. And so in this theory, because it is developmental, it really can apply to just about everything, and I use it just about like that. So let's start with a hypothetical student. I'm sorry. I teach at Virginia State University. I conduct research there over the last 8 years. I've had about $1 million in funding to just look at why a mentoring intervention works. So we find a student, who came in with a vulnerability level in biology. She wants to be a doctor. She takes her first biology course. She finds that she's never had lab experience in her high school. So she's really unfamiliar with a lot of the basic tenets of biology. That was a risk. She gets her first quiz and it's not good. So she calls home where she's a first generation college student, and she has people there who, even though they don't understand college, they do understand her and they hear her distress. And so she gets this outpouring of love and affection, and you can do it. And I know you can, just keep trying. But she really does lack the skill set that would tell her how to now study in this whole new, completely different context. And so what the university could do, so before I go to university, so she reacts to that stress. She can react to that stress by reaching out to what the university offers in terms of support, or she could do her normal reactive coping, because now this is an ego destructive event. All her life, she's been told that she's smart. She has gotten now this failing quiz grade. She's never failed anything. She could react in the way that she does when under high stress, which is to avoid, to go in, to not talk about it. That would be maladaptive in this case. And we have many students who take that route, somehow in their minds label themselves as not being able to do college, and then they come out of it with failing grades and eventually drop out. On the other hand, you have students who have some kind of way of dealing with stress that is adaptive, or the university has provided them with mentors or experiences that prepared them for the possibility that your first quiz may not go so well. Interventions belong in these bidirectional arrows. So any kind of intervention that you give, I can place on this grid. And what this figure allows me to do is then to see how far you are away from the emergent identity. If you are just providing skill, that doesn't necessarily get you to the emergent identity unless you first go through providing help for the stress, the normal way that students react and cope, and their relationship with failure. Let's face it, failure is a natural outcome of studying mathematics. You have to fail to succeed. But in the culture many of our students have come from, failure is not seen as a good thing. So I know that my time is short, and I'll just cut to the chase. We need theory and theoretically grounded publications and scholarship in this field. We need it because if we're all working in the same basis, if we're all speaking similar language, if we all are grounding our work and framing our work, that we know that identity is where we need to go, coping mechanisms, how to handle net stress and vulnerabilities. If we all knew that, I think we can go farther together. You want to go fast, go alone. You want to go far, go together. I'm going to stop there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Talley. That was very insightful. And if you can stop sharing, I hope we can find a way to share these slides out with our audience, because that was an excellent depiction and we greatly appreciate it. And in the interest of time, I'm going to move to our next presenter, who is Dr. Heather Metcalf, Director of Research and Constituent Relations for the Women in Engineering Proactive Network, or WEPAN. She serves as Principal Investigator for the Advanced Resource and Coordination Network. Dr. Metcalf has undergraduate degrees in Applied Mathematics and Computer Science from Clarion University of Pennsylvania, master's degrees in Computer Science from the University of Illinois at Urbana, and Gender Studies from the University of Arizona, and a doctorate in Higher Education Science and Technology Policy from the University of Arizona. And we are honored to have you, Heather. So take it away.
Thank you for having me here. What a great bunch of talks that we've had so far, and I'm really excited to build on those and have a conversation with attendees today. I'll share my screen and offer up a few slides here. Does the fit of the slides look okay to you? I know we were having issue on the last one.
Yes, they look okay.
Okay, great. So as Cindy mentioned, my name is Heather Metcalf, and I'm Director of Research and Constituent Relations at the Women in Engineering Proactive Network, where I also serve as PI on the Advanced Resource and Coordination Network. My colleague, Dr. Rashel Williams, who's on the panel today, is a co-PI with me on the grant, and Dr. Roberta Rincon also serves on our Research Advisory Board. So you get to hear a wealth of expertise coming from that project on the panel today. The ARC network focuses on gender equity in the STEM academy and academic professions. And what I'll share today with you is some workplace data related to gender and engineering and STEM more broadly. And I'll also share a bit more about the ARC network and the frameworks that we use to support intersectional gender equity in STEM. So as a starting point, while we know that the proportion of engineering degrees awarded to women has either been relatively flat or slightly grown at all levels over the last 2 decades, women still only comprise about 24% of all engineering degrees awarded at the doctoral level, 26% at the master's level, and 22% at the bachelor's level. For Black, Latinx, and Indigenous women, these figures are even more stark. BIPOC women earn less than 15% of bachelor's and master's degree and less than 10% of doctoral degrees across all of STEM. Research also shows that women represent 38% of tenured scientists and engineers, but less than 5% of those are BIPOC women. So what we're trying to do with the ARC network is to address these gender equity issues from an intersectional perspective. And I'll speak to what that means here in just a moment. The ARC Network was founded in 2017, funded by the National Science Foundation to connect and serve widely dispersed scholars, practitioners, decision makers, and change agents committed to academic STEM equity in an engaged stakeholder community that shares and translates the tools needed for change. So you've already heard today a number of different projects, tools, and resources that are being used to address equity issues in STEM. And what we try to do with the ARC Network is bring those all together and make sure we're disseminating them back out so that folks can, instead of starting at square one, build on the foundation that other groups have already laid for us and moving the path forward. In service to this community, the ARC Network removes barriers to resources, reduces duplication of equity and systemic change efforts, and curates, recovers, and synthesizes the body of knowledge on and promising practices for systemic change. Our theory of change is that in sharing resources and working together in community, we can magnify our collective impact on intersectional faculty equity in STEM across a range of departments and academic institutions. So how do we do this? We engage the community through virtual and in-person events such as town halls, webinars, open office hours, and a biennial conference. But we also curate and disseminate resources in partnership with the community. We have an online resource library with over 2,000 curated and tagged resources, including research papers, policy documents, toolkits, presentations, and so much more to support the community in their systemic change efforts. We also host emerging research workshops and a virtual visiting scholar program in which researchers and practitioners synthesize what we know and offer expert recommendations on how to apply this to practice and future research. In fact, tomorrow we have a town hall set on centering equity and institutional responses to COVID-19. And when I'm finished with my presentation, I'll share that link in the chat in case anyone is interested. The mission, vision, and the work of the ARC Network is centered on 3 pillars of intersectionality, intentionality, and inclusivity. We refer to these as the 3 I's. The first I is intersectionality. We apply this critical framework for examining how systems of oppression intertwine to influence experiences and opportunities. To be clear, intersectional or intersectionality is not a category of identities. It's a framework and a lens through which we examine how systems of oppression intertwine to influence experience and opportunities, and how we develop approaches to transforming spaces and relationships. Intersectionality has been around for quite some time as a concept and theory for examining interlocking systems of power and oppression, as I mentioned. For example, Sojourner Truth's activism in the mid-1800s called to attention the differential experiences of oppression had by white women and Black women and the functioning of racism within the suffragist movement. I'd be remiss if I did not cite the women of color, particularly Black women, who laid the foundation for critical intersectionality work. Throughout US history, women of color like Bell Hooks, Patricia Hill Collins, Kimberly Crenshaw, Gloria Anzaldúa, Sherry Moraga, and others have called for our gender equity work to look more closely at what we mean and who we include or exclude when we talk about women's experiences. Intersectionality as a framework allows us to do just that. It guides us in situating and interpreting experience from various social, political, economic, environmental, and historical contexts and structures. The systems that shape our experiences of identity cannot ever really be separated, even though we often study them in this way. For example, a Black woman with a disability does not experience her engineering workplace as only a woman or a Black person or a person with a disability, but through her own unique interaction with the systems in which she's situated. Intersectionality allows us to make visible similarity across difference and difference across similarity, and reminds us to connect individual and group experiences back to their systemic roots. Our second I is inclusivity. As we work towards a transformation systemically, we must include and center the historically marginalized and excluded voices within our communities. The barriers to equity in STEM and their corresponding solutions may manifest in different ways or with different impacts for different community members. As my colleague Roberta Rincon mentioned when we talked about inclusivity, that there's a difference between equality and equity. Equality would give each person the same resource, regardless of the context in which they're situated in. Equity makes sure that each person has the exact resource that they need to make sure that they can be successful in their environment. Lastly, we have intentionality, which is about aligning our stated goals and values with our actions and basing both on knowledge, especially related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So for a couple of examples of how this framework and the 3 I's can really help us understand data better, often when we study workplace attrition, we hear the stories repeated, particularly in the research, that family reasons are a primary reason that women leave from their the occupations in which they got their degrees, or that they don't take a job in that area in the first place. However, when we look at gender and race together, we can see that it's a much more complicated picture. For example, in the slide that I have on the screen right now for white women, the reasons are split kind of evenly across pay and promotion, a change in their field of interest, and job unavailability. Whereas for Black women, job unavailability is the largest and most profound reason why women end up taking a job in a field that isn't the area in which they got their degree. This makes it necessary for us to look at these intersections of systemic issues that create experiences, present barriers, and also create room for opportunity. When we look at STEM workplace harassment and culture research, intersectionality also complicates matters. For example, in the field of physics, there's some research that shows that LGBT physicists' experiences of harassment differ based on whether a person identifies as a man, a woman, gender nonconforming, or transgender. In research that I've conducted on comfort level sharing and being out about a disability in a STEM workplace, women of color are the most uncomfortable in expressing a disability in their workplace, especially if they're LGBTQ. So these are much more complicated than we typically think of these issues being. Lastly, in terms of career progression by gender and race, we can see here that if we look at gender alone, men are more represented in the upper echelons of academic leadership than women, particularly beyond the assistant professor level. Adding race into the mix allows us to see that for Black, Indigenous, and Latinx women, this downward trend is even more stark, and that Black, Latinx, and Indigenous men have a fairly steady representation throughout all their ranks, even if the representation is low. This suggests different policy and practice areas worth looking at for enrollment, hiring, promotion, and tenure process that varies by gender and race and other dimensions of marginalization that people might experience. I hope these examples are helpful in illustrating why we take the approach that we do in the ARC network, and I really look forward to continuing this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Metcalf. Those slides were very powerful. In the interest of time, we're going to save questions for the end. And so our next panelist, who I have the honor of introducing, is Dr. Roberta Rincon, Associate Director of Research for the Society of Women Engineers. She oversees the organization's research activities on gender equity issues affecting women in engineering and technology during their education and careers. In this role, she applies her expertise to influence cultural and policy changes in academic, industry, and public policy spheres. Dr. Rincon received her BS in Civil Engineering from the University of Texas at Austin, an MBA and an MS in Information Management from Arizona State University, and a PhD in Educational Policy and Planning from UT Austin. So with that, I turn it over to Dr. Rincon.
Thank you, Cindy. And can you tell me, does my background look appropriate? I get that mirroring mixed up.
It looks okay.
Okay, wonderful. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because I do have some slides. Okay, can you see the screen okay?
It looks good.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this panel session. And I'm going to try not to be too repetitive from what Heather has said, but I think what I'm sharing today really does complement, kind of dovetail off of what Heather was sharing with you. I want to start off by talking a little bit about the Society of Women Engineers. We've been around for over 70 years, and we have over 40,000 members worldwide. We have a growing international membership, especially in countries in South America, in India, Europe. And we also have a growing SWE Next membership, which is our free K-12 membership, one of our outreach efforts. Our mission is to empower women to achieve their full potential in careers as engineers and leaders. And over the last few years, we've really been focusing on that last piece of our mission, demonstrating the value of diversity and inclusion, and not just educating organizations or the companies and employers that we work with and have relationships with, but also modeling it ourselves. So we've really been looking internally, looking at our membership, looking at our leadership, looking at the processes that we use to recognize engineers and leaders. And we want to make sure that we are demonstrating ourselves the importance and the value of DEI in engineering and technology. So I want to share some data that kind of ties into what Heather was sharing earlier, and just explain why SWE exists. Back in 1950, when we first got started, less than 1% of working engineers were women. Now we're at about 13% of the engineering workforce are women. And that is an increase, but as you can see in this graph, we are definitely far behind the gender parity that we're seeing in some of these other STEM occupations like biology and chemistry. And that gray line that you see, computer scientists, has actually been going down since the 1990s and has just recently sort of leveled out. So we can see that when we talk about STEM broadly, it can hide some of these differences, these areas of concern, these trends that we're seeing, where we need to pay a bit more attention, particularly as SWE does in engineering and technology. This is just a graph of the science and engineering degrees awarded to women, where you can also see that we are drawing more women to certain STEM disciplines, psychology, biology, social sciences, definitely seeing a greater number of women pursuing these degrees as compared to engineering and computer science. But we also need to dive into the intersection of race and gender and see where we're seeing some of the increase that we've seen over time among women's degrees being earned in engineering and computer science. For white women, as shown in this graph, we've actually seen that increase from 2008 to now, but we've seen a decrease in the representation of Black and African American women earning engineering degrees as compared to their white counterparts. So just talking about, the need to increase the number of women pursuing degrees in engineering isn't enough. We need to dive in to the data and disaggregate it so that we can see where we're seeing possibly some successes, but also some disturbing trends. We also see the same trend happening among Black and African American women in computer science, and that's that blue line there. But unlike we're seeing in engineering, white women earning degrees in computer science has been pretty much level over the last decade or so. We've seen some increase among Asian women earning degrees in computer science over the last few years. So disaggregating this data and looking at where we're seeing success and where we're lagging behind can help us sort of pinpoint where more attention may be needed. And when we talk about women of color earning degrees in engineering, it's important for us to recognize the important role that HBCUs, HSIs, and TCUs play in this work. They account for about 15% of all bachelor's degrees awarded in engineering in the United States, but 29% of the bachelor's degrees awarded to Black women and 39% of the bachelor's degrees awarded to Hispanic women. So they play a significant role in helping us diversify the engineering profession, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be paying attention to what's happening in the predominantly white institutions. This definitely is a bit of a red flag in some cases, in that we need to understand what we can do to encourage more women, particularly women of color, to enter engineering degrees across all institutions and stay in those degree programs. So I want to close by talking a little bit about what researchers are looking at as to the why. What can we do to help encourage more girls and women to pursue degrees in engineering, to enter the engineering profession, and to stay? The Society of Women Engineers conducts a literature review of relevant research every year. And over the last few years, some things that have kind of stood out to us around the area of why girls are not choosing engineering majors, we see researchers looking at the importance of early exposure to STEM, and the fact that a number of researchers are seeing that girls are losing interest in STEM in middle and high school. And this points to the importance of us not taking the approach of just, exposing girls to engineering, seeing that spark of interest, and then not maintaining that. We have, the Society of Women Engineers has a study that we're doing with researchers out of UT Austin, looking at the development of an engineering identity in high school girls. And this really goes to that point. These are girls that have expressed interest in engineering, and we want to know over the course of 3 or so years whether that interest stays and follows them into college and into an engineering degree program. We also see researchers looking at gendered expectations and stereotypes, the stereotypes or expectations of parents, of teachers when it comes to what is an appropriate occupation for a woman, for a degree program for a girl to pursue in college, and how that can influence a woman's decision to pursue a particular STEM discipline or STEM career in general. We also see researchers looking at why women choose certain STEM fields over others. As we saw in the graph earlier, we see gender parity being reached in chemistry and biology more so than we see in engineering and computer science. Why is that? Some researchers are theorizing that maybe it's because women are more people-oriented or community-oriented, and so they're drawn to being doctors or environmental engineers more so than maybe a mechanical engineer or electrical engineer. And then the need for more role models. In chemistry and biology, you see more women. There's that saying, you can't be what you can't see. Does that, and is that playing a role in these decisions that girls are making with regards to what occupation they are pursuing? And then we also see researchers looking at why women leave STEM, specifically around workplace climate and culture. SWE has done some research around gender bias in the engineering workplace and the influence and impact that has on women's decisions to stay or leave the engineering profession. We've also seen research around the difficulties with career advancement, which is something that Heather had also mentioned in her presentation. The pay and promotion issues and how difficult it is for some women to have their work recognized and get the promotions and fair performance evaluations that they feel that they deserve, and that will help them move up in their organizations. So lots of work to be done, lots of work that the Society of Women Engineers is doing, along with a lot of other researchers out there to try and combat these issues, these challenges, these barriers that women are seeing as they pursue their STEM aspirations. And I thank you very much for allowing me to share this information with you.
Thank you, Roberta. That was wonderful. And thank you for posting your contact information. It would be great if you could put that in the chat as well.
Will do.
And, at this time, it is my privilege to introduce our final panelist for this session today, Dr. Rashel Williams, who is an engineer, educator, advocate for equitable work environments in science, technology, engineering, and STEM mathematics as well. professions. Dr. Williams is the Senior Director of Programs at the National Society of Black Engineers, or as we all know it, NASB, whose mission is to increase the number of Black engineers who excel academically and succeed professionally and have a positive impact in the community. Dr. Williams received her Bachelor of Science in Physics from Spelman College and both her Masters of Engineering and in Mechanical Engineering and a PhD in Science and Mathematics Education from Southern University and A&M College. And with that, I turn it over to Dr. Rashel Williams. You look good, Dr. Williams. We can see your slide.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Greetings, everyone. It is just such an honor to be on this panel with so many women I love and respect. We've had the opportunity to work together for a few years now. And so I'm just really glad I get to serve as the person who's going to bring all this together to really help us understand how institutions, professional organizations, and networks can come together to develop equity-centered approaches that will lead to increased representation of girls and women in engineering. To start, I want to share with you my thoughts on shifting the racial equity narrative from asking, how do we increase the number of Blacks, Hispanics, Native Americans, women, or other underrepresented groups in engineering, to how do we remove the systemic, structural, and cultural barriers that prohibit their full participation in the first place. At NSBE, we really do try to challenge ourselves daily to think about how we consciously or even unconsciously participate in white supremacy culture via how we show up in the educational system, in our relationship to the large number of industry partners that we have, and really in our compliance with ABET accreditation in the support of faculty, staff, and students. As such, we really know that we have to take a firm stance in working to uproot systems that make way for the continued justification of institutional racism and the systemic exclusion of underrepresented groups in engineering. And so I'll start by just saying I recognize my privilege and understand that the trajectory of my career has really provided me with opportunities to sit at tables and bear witness to conversations on topics around HBCUs and traditionally marginalized groups in STEM, where I have heard people in positions of power make these statements, and I'm sure you've heard them too. And I just reiterate that these are people in positions of power who are saying words such as HBCUs don't prepare students for the real world, or HBCUs are not producers of rigorous research. I've also heard industry leaders say students from HBCUs don't measure up to those we recruit from PWIs. I'm sure you've read that in some of the media that's come out around Google and their programs with HBCUs. Also hearing from people in positions of power say that faculty at HBCUs are only there because they couldn't get into a teaching position at a predominantly white institution. And so if we honestly reflect on how we've reacted to a lot of those statements, and I'm sure statements that you all have heard on your own, we've really reacted in a way that's focused on fixing the student, fixing the woman, fixing the administration, or fixing the faculty, and less on how do we truly uproot this white supremacy culture that these ideas are grounded in. And so I've listed some of these ideas here, and I have a reference to where I've learned more about white supremacy culture, because like I said, it's a daily education, unlearning and relearning for a lot of us. And so the characteristics listed are damaging because they are used as norms and standards that we feed into how we create policy and how we evaluate people and processes. And so these attitudes and behaviors can show up in any group or organization. And so, like I said from the beginning, we at NSBE even challenge ourselves to think about how do we consciously or unconsciously support white supremacy culture, because it doesn't matter. These things have been normalized for us for so many years. So now, like I said, it's about unlearning these things. And so when we think about systems such as US education, thinking about industry and even accreditation processes, we know that it's rooted in the idea of quantity over quality in a lot of instances. So here we're thinking about there not being a true understanding that when there's conflict between content and process will typically prevail. So when we think about this conversation that was had in a previous session around, culturally responsive pedagogy, how do we decenter whiteness from the engineering curriculum to ensure that as our students grow in their desire to be engineers or to be scientists, that they are designing and creating products that don't have bias built into them. When we think about power hoarding, those with power who feel threatened when anyone suggests changes in how things should be done within an organization or within a school system, how are we challenging that and in our reflection of what leadership looks like? When I think of accreditation, I think about the defensiveness sometimes and the excuses that are made as to why we can't consider diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice in the accreditation criteria because, accreditation for engineering is global. So this doesn't impact institutions outside of the US. So we have to really begin to call out and dismantle these very things that really impedes our ability to increase our representation as women, as those from underrepresented racial, ethnic groups in engineering so that we can move forward. And so then I'll just end by saying, at NSBE, we're working diligently in these areas. In the education front, I think about our work with Seek, which is our summer engineering experience for kids. It's a 3-week program for 3rd through 5th graders. And right now we are working with TechBridge Girls, to develop a curriculum for girls in middle school, and they'll participate in Seek this summer, but it centers equity and justice in the Seek curriculum this year for them. I think about NSBE as a convener and our ability to bring together engineering deans and MEP officers. And so how do we use this convening power to really relay our need to address the systemic issues at institutions across the country? In our relationship with industry, I just think about our career fairs and how can we better challenge those who are seeking to have relationships with our students through scholarships or through internships or full-time placement, but really how do we hold these companies accountable when it comes to their efforts when it's related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So their DEI efforts aren't limited to just them participating in SWE, SHIP, SACNAS conferences. And then also working with Roberta with our NSF Includes Planning Grant along with SHIP to focus on how are we really talking to industry in understanding how we dismantle barriers that impact women of color in the engineering workplace. And then finally, around accreditation, conversations within NSBE, how do we serve as a vessel to help support, champion the efforts that we know have been talked about for years around getting equity, inclusion, and justice into the accreditation criteria? And also, how do we make the program evaluators more understanding of issues around bias, equity, and inclusion before they get to campuses? So I will stop there and open the floor for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rashel Williams. I have a couple of questions, but you hit so many good points. I have to try to get 2 questions in to you because we're right on that topic. And these are from our students who participated in an orientation yesterday. One of our students wanted to know, what would it take to implement more camps like NASB's Seek in Jackson, Mississippi, in other areas? She thinks this can increase confidence in women around math, or excuse me, increase confidence in women when they're around men. And she was wondering, what's the methodology for scaling programs like that to areas that they don't currently exist in?
Yeah, so sadly and gratefully at the same time, our SEEK program is actually funded by industry partners or private foundations. 100% of our funding comes from them. So typically we have to go in areas where their companies are located or where they have a preference. What we are trying to do now for next year, because we've actually been virtual, we were virtual last year for SEEK, we will be virtual again this year for SEEK, but for next year, what we want to do is a SEEK by HBCU. And so I want to work with HBCU partners on how do we actually get the SEEK programs on their campuses. Because of where these HBCUs are located, we know that it is going to hit more of the rural students that don't have access to SEEK right now, or even to a NSBE junior chapter. So when we think about scaling, I think we just have to get real creative in how we approach using the resources that are already there. And like I said, how do we come together as institutions and networks to scale some of these models that we know already work?
Thank you so much. And now my next question is for the whole panel. We had several female students yesterday in our student orientation workshop ask this question, and it's kind of a repeat, but it has a couple of prongs. How do you start, or how do you plan to start a family while being a woman in engineering? And also, does family support play a part in choosing a path in engineering? And all of you ladies have multiple degrees, including engineering degrees. So these girls that are coming up, the next generation, pursuing possible PhDs in engineering, they're wondering, how do they do it and have a family too? And how can they succeed, and not cut their opportunities short by making decisions that might limit their opportunities?
I'm happy to start off.
Okay.
I'll say that is honestly the reason why I left engineering, is because I didn't see any women who were, well, I didn't see any women engineers. So the men that I worked with that had families had a stay-at-home spouse. And so I thought that was that was what was required, because I just didn't see anyone doing what I wanted to do. They didn't have sort of like it all, right? I mean, the family and the career. It wasn't until later that I realized that you can do that. You can have the family and the career. There are women who do it, and women engineers. And I think that, if I had been more involved with organizations like SHIP, like SWE, that I would have seen that, and talked with others who were doing that. Because now that I've had a couple of kids, I've worked full time throughout, I've gone back to school, I've done all that, it's definitely possible. There are employers out there that will work with you to, if you need more flexible work schedule, especially now. It's so different than it was 25 years ago when I graduated from college and was thinking about, what's next in my life. There's more possibilities, more opportunities, more flexible options available to you. Employers that will help you, pay for your schooling, who will allow you to drop the number of hours you're working if you need to, and not penalize you for doing so. So the options are there. I think finding women who are doing that, and finding those role models or those who can give you some advice on the options available to you, and then finding those employers who are supportive of that is really, really important.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to take that question? And I'm just going to remind you, if you're not speaking, you have to mute your mic so that the camera will go to the speaker. Dr. Williams, did you want to say your thoughts on this?
Yes, I actually have a unpopular viewpoint. I don't have a desire to have children, but I will say I have seen, even in my singleness, the importance of having family or a community or a village to help you. And so some of the women I'm closest to who are very successful engineers and educators, one thing they have in common is that they have a strong support system. So even for those of you who don't desire to have a family in the traditional sense, know that still having a village is extremely important for your trajectory in your career.
Let me just go to Dr. Talley for a second, because I know that you're talking a lot about the social emotional needs of students in your research. And I'm just wondering what the research has revealed about this issue of women in engineering trying to pursue having it all, having a family, having a career, even pursuing a PhD, which takes even longer than just an engineering degree. What has your research found, Dr. Talley, about this?
Well, I really can't speak to my research because it really focuses on these the needs of students in terms of how they identify. But I believe that my research could be utilized for women once they are in the career field. The needs are still there. The coping mechanisms, the stress, the stressor, the necessary stressors. Stressors are not all bad. We get a challenge and we go over it. That is how we learn. But I can't express my appreciation more to Dr. Williams for pointing out this need for support systems at every level. We've seen how it works at the undergraduate level, but graduate school, in career, mid-career, there is always a need for this village, and the motivation can be summoned when there is a nurturing environment. You are a strong, the young girl who asked that question, you don't even know the strength that you have yet. It takes a challenge to show you your own power, and the nurture that you'll find in a loving community, people who get you, people who tell you the truth, that is what will propel you to heights unknown.
Thank you so much for that comment. And now I'm going to just shift over to Dr. Heather Metcalf and Dr. Roberta Rincon, because I think you're partnered together on a planning grant, an NSF Includes planning grant that has some events coming up. And in our last couple of minutes, would either or both of you like to speak to that planning grant opportunity that you have? I think you have 2 events planned in the coming year.
That's Dr. Williams and Dr. Rincon. So
yeah, that's the NSF Includes planning grant to create the Women of Color in Engineering Collaborative. Rochelle mentioned that in her presentation. And we do have our first convening of our founding members coming up next week. We're so excited. We've had some really great response to our invitation to participate. We have limited it right now just to make it manageable as we develop our shared vision and develop these first partnerships and think about what's possible, right? What's possible, and what work can we do together? What impact can we have together that maybe we can't have alone, or we wouldn't have alone? So very excited about this. It is going to run through, I think, May of next year is when our project is scheduled to end, and we're supposed to have our strategic plan, but we anticipate growing this collaborative over the coming years. That's our goal, that's our plan, and including more organizations that have members who are women engineers of color in the future. Rochelle, did you have anything to add?
Thank you so
No, that's
much.
perfect.
I think Dr. Metcalf, you mentioned an event tomorrow for your organization. Do you want to just reiterate that for our audience?
Sure. So tomorrow we're having a town hall that's on institutional decision-making during COVID-19 and how do we center equity as our institutions are making those decisions. We had a town hall a year ago on this topic pretty early on in the pandemic and had a number of different folks share challenges that they were facing, concerns that they were having, and tons of resources got exchanged for addressing those issues. So we expect to revisit that conversation in light of vaccines being available, new policies being made, different experiences. We're a year into it, more than a year into it now. And so we welcome anyone to come and share their perspectives with us and to learn from the community.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of the women in our panel today and our earlier presenters. And especially thank you to Carol Carter and Global Minded. I'm going to give Carol an opportunity to close us out because actually Global Minded never stops working for underrepresented groups and first generation students. And she's still working as we speak on producing even more events the next few weeks during her virtual event Reboot Resilience series. So Carol, do you want to mention the upcoming Global Minded events?
Yes, I just want to say that the next few days will be just as high impact as this because Cindy and Steve and Clay, the rest of the team, have really carefully chosen each and every person who will be part of this. NSF includes lineup of just, I'll say, STEM stars, because you really are. And I want to just have everyone put on their calendar right now that we're going to be live in Denver next June, the third week of June. And we should do a pre-conference on that grant you all just got that closes in May and share out, you know, just with our real inclusive community, ways we can all really help to travel this work. Because I think that's the biggest thing the pandemic showed is lots of different things are being done. Lots of different things pre-pandemic in silos. And now we realize we really want to close the equity gap. We have to really come together in all different ways to be able to mobilize these solutions. So thanks to all of you. It's been great. And as Cindy said, next week we have our inclusive health leaders all week long, very diverse doctors from every single background on a lot of the issues that were caused from COVID and how we'll be responding for the most impacted populations. Many of those are the students that you work with and populations you serve. And the following week, we have our first gen leadership program. So it's all week. It's every single day at 4 o'clock Eastern time. It will be recorded. So your first gen students or any of the students that are part of NSBE or SHIP or any, you know, feel free to share that with them, and any of them can sign up to be part of that live. So it's some of our graduates over the last few years. It's many role models in midlife. It's a lot of ways for students to see themselves in the kinds of leaders that each of you are, so that they can really, like we said earlier, I forgot who said it, but you have to be able to see it in order to be it. So we look forward to learning more ways we can partner with you, and just so very appreciative that all of you dedicated your time today to this. And we look forward to working with you in many, many ways in the future. So thanks to everybody, and thanks to everyone who attended. We'll be recording these sessions hour by hour, and they'll be in our newsletter if you're part of our newsletter. And we'll also have them on the Global Minded YouTube channel, so you can share them with your students, you can share them with your colleagues who may not have been able to attend today. Thanks again so much, everybody. You guys did a great job.
Thank you. And we hope you'll join us tomorrow for day 2 of our EARMI workshop. Bye-bye.